Order. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're here this morning to have a productive discussion of how spectrum policy can advance public safety, promote broadband, generate revenue for the U.S. Treasury, and create jobs. This hearing will focus on how we can bring new and innovative tools to our nation's first responders. Look, we all share the goal of providing America's first responders with a state-of-the-art communications network. We are by no means the first Congress to attempt to bring public safety these tools. Interoperable public safety communication has been an objective of this country since even before the tragic events of September 11th of 2001. Yet even though Congress and the FCC have tried time and again to provide the tools and impetus to make this a reality, today's public safety users are only marginally closer to the interoperable communications they need. We're here to get it right this time. Now, what we're not here to do is to point fingers for past failures. Nobody doubts the good intentions and the hard work of those who have worked on this issue in the past. But the fact remains, we have not been successful. Today's hearing gives us an opportunity to hear the lessons of the public safety community, the wireless sector, and the engineers who make wireless networks work. Taking the innovation and expertise of the wireless industry alongside the bravery and knowledge of the public safety community, we can all work to provide needed resources to both. The successful creation and management of an interoperable public safety network will need to focus on 4 elements: spectrum, equipment, governance, and funding. We have provided public safety with nearly 100 megahertz of spectrum for their exclusive use. Given that fact, it's strange to me that the debate on public safety communications has been so focused on the 700 megahertz D block. Public safety has more spectrum than the vast majority of wireless providers, who, as it's oft-cited, provide a 16-year-old customer with more capabilities than those available to our first responders. As recently as our 2005 DTV legislation, Congress cleared 24 megahertz of spectrum for an interoperable public safety network. Yet 6 years later, that spectrum lays woefully underused. In fact, far from providing next-generation interoperable services, more than half of that spectrum has been dedicated to the legacy, narrow-band voice communications that NYPD Deputy Chief Charles Dowd called, quote, extremely limited, quote, at our April hearing. Clearly, something in our approach isn't working. Could we better use that 24 megahertz for the broadband network that public safety needs? Congress has also tried to address the finances of a public safety network. Chairman Upton's amendment to the 2005 DTV legislation provided $1 billion to public safety to help defray the cost of radios, and according to the Congressional Research Service, more than $13 billion in federal funds have been invested in public safety communications since 9/11. So I look forward today to hearing how these resources have been used to further their intended goals and what we can learn from how those funds were spent. Now, the last piece of this equation, the governance of the network, may indeed be the most difficult and yet most critical part. We need to figure out how this network should be built, operated, and maintained. I continue to support the idea of a public-private partnership between commercial wireless providers and public safety to address first responders' needs. Initial FCC efforts to hardwire such a partnership into the auction of the D block, however, failed to find a commercial provider sufficiently interested in purchasing the licenses. This failure is widely attributed to poor auction design that asked bidders to sign up for a vaguely defined obligation to negotiate with Public Safety Spectrum Trust, an entity created to govern the use of the 24 megahertz of spectrum for public safety. We should continue to examine better ways of creating a public-private partnership. Public safety radio networks have traditionally been characterized by local control of nearly all elements of the network, from choosing the equipment vendors to oversight of the standards evolution. It's our goal to create a nationwide interoperable network. This kind of local communications fiefdom cannot continue to dominate the public safety communications debate. We need to find the right balance between local input and national coordination. That's why I'm glad to see the Public Safety Alliance has provided us a witness for the second consecutive hearing on this topic. The Public Safety Alliance represents a sweeping scope of public safety entities working together toward a common goal, and interoperable communications will require a level of coordination far above the local police and fire chiefs and a level of wireless expertise that frankly few can provide. To that end, I believe that any governance structure for public safety communications should recognize the nationwide scope of this critical issue and the incredible pace of innovation in the wireless communications sector. Public safety wireless devices have begun to lag behind the capabilities available to commercial users. The end result has been firefighters and police officers relying on their personal wireless devices sometimes in times of emergency. That's not what we want. This cannot be the new normal for America's first responders. I thank the witnesses for their participation today. I think I can speak for all of us when I say we thank each of you for your commitment to increasing public safety and look forward to a vibrant discussion of the communications needs of America's first responders. With that, I yield to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this very important hearing, and to all the witnesses that are here today. I can't help but think that the most common occurrence in our hearings is that we're hearing from the private sector. But at each table here, ours and yours, we are all public servants for the most part in this, and the importance of what we do and what needs to be built simply cannot be underscored enough. This has great significance to our country, the creation of an interoperable public safety network. We're approaching the 10th anniversary of the horrific attack on our country. It's not a source of pride to any of us that first responders remain unable to seamlessly communicate with each other. The attacks on 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, and the shootings at Virginia Tech are among the incidences that remind us why we need a robust next-generation public safety network. We owe it to our first responders. You put your lives on the line for our country, for our communities every single day. So there has to be a 21st century network that's put together so that you can really carry out what you do so well. Over the past several years, we've grappled with the question of how to best build and maintain such a network. Should we reallocate the D block or auction the spectrum and use the proceeds to build out a public safety network as the FCC's National Broadband Plan recommended last year? I've given this question significant thought, and I think the plan we commit to must be properly funded, which is a big thing. It's a simple phrase, but it needs to be properly funded, and use the spectrum available to its maximum efficiency and bring forward the expertise of those in the telecommunications sector as well. We have one chance to build this network, and we need to do it right. I don't want to have to revisit this. I don't want you to come in and say it's broken. Congress does things, and if the legislation doesn't get it right, we don't get back to it for at least another decade. And I don't think we can afford to do that at this stage in the life of our country. I think the recent draft discussion by Senators Rockefeller and Hutchinson offers a well-thought-out proposal that should be given consideration within this committee. I strongly believe that we have to leverage the strength of the private sector and establish an independent entity that has the responsibility for building and overseeing the network. I believe that public safety in our country are expert at public safety. But I also think that there is expertise that needs to be brought to public safety that you simply don't possess. I mean, there are some that may know something about it, but our private sector can really be highly instructive in this. I want to hear from our witnesses today on how much spectrum is really needed, what are the next generation applications that first responders expect to use, and are there opportunities to use some of the spectrum to support commercial broadband networks. We should also give significant consideration to the devices that public safety will use once a network is built. By one estimate, approximately 80% of the public safety narrowband equipment market is held by one company. Last Congress, I joined with Representatives Harman and Shimkus as a co-sponsor of the Next Generation Public Safety Device Act, which would address this serious problem. Spectrum is the foundation for any national public safety network, but without a competitive device market, our efforts to achieve interoperability and lower the cost of public safety devices could be blocked. We're planning to reintroduce this legislation, and I would ask the chairman that it be considered as part of a comprehensive public safety bill that this committee agrees to. As we work on the needs of our first responders, we can't forget about our nation's 911 calling centers, the call centers, which are often the first line of defense for those in distress. Every day, 911 call centers receive more than 650,000 calls across the country. A next-generation 911 system will enable first responders to receive photos, video, and text messages, which can improve the quality and the speed of emergency response. I think this all needs to be integrated. These upgrades should be incorporated into comprehensive public safety legislation. So I thank all the witnesses that are here today for not only being here today to give us your testimony and your views, but also to the public safety chieftains of our country for what you do for our communities in our country day in and day out. I think that you're real heroes of our country, and in response to your needs, I think that we can produce a bipartisan, bicameral legislation that will honor your work and give you the necessary tools to operate a robust, interoperable communication network for our country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. And now I recognize the chairman of the full committee, who has put an enormous amount of work into this issue over many years, Mr. Upton, for his statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I share Ms. Eshu's enthusiasm and Mr. Walden's as well about putting together a bipartisan plan that really gets to the finish line. And today's hearing, as we know, is focused on the technology and the expertise needed to produce an interoperable communications network for our nation's first responders. By no means the first hearing on this issue, nor is it the first attempt by Congress to give public safety the tools needed to make interoperability a reality. The 05 DTD legislation cleared 24 megahertz block of spectrum nationwide for the public safety's exclusive use, a key recommendation of the 9/11 Commission. I proposed the amendment that was successful and worked with my friend Mr. Stupak to that legislation that provided $1 billion for interoperable equipment. In all CRS reports that public safety has been given $13 billion from the federal government for radio equipment since 2001. But despite those tools, the interoperable network still remains elusive. The question is, what will bring us closer to making interoperable voice and broadband communications a reality? Some say we should reallocate the D block, but current law requires that spectrum to be auctioned, and doing otherwise would create roughly a $3 billion hole in the budget that most of us know that we cannot afford. So today we'll discuss ways to meet public safety's technological needs while leveraging the competition and innovation that have characterized the commercial wireless marketplace. The dialogue is a critical component of winning public safety strategy. America's commercial wireless providers are world leaders in technology for sure, spectrum efficiency, and innovative services. Cooperation between the robust commercial sector and the critical public safety sector will not only permit each to focus on what they do best, but will make both sectors stronger in the tough economy. I now yield to Mr. Barker.
Thank you, Chairman Upton. This is a very important issue. It's a very vexing issue. I mean, we can say that back in 2001, there was a legitimate excuse not to have an interoperable network. But 10 years later, and as Chairman Upton just pointed out, $13 billion being spent at the federal level. The Digital Transition Act, which I helped pass when I was chairman, that freed up 24 megahertz of spectrum for the public sector. I don't see that there's any real excuse to not have an interoperable network. And I'm not sure it's a spectrum issue. In my congressional district, in my home county, my firemen, policemen, sheriff's department have double-digit number of systems, very few of whom communicate with each other. It's not a lack of spectrum, and it may be a lack of funding at the local level, but you know, this is an important hearing. As the subcommittee chairman said, we need to get the policy right, but we also need some honest answers from our witnesses about what's going on in the real world. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate the full committee chairman and the subcommittee chairman giving this a priority. And I yield to Congressman Terry of Nebraska.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I don't think anyone here doesn't share in the same goal of an interoperable system. But it is confusing to me as we sit here 5-6 years after supposedly putting us on a road to interoperable that we've spent $13 billion, we've provided 24 megahertz, and now we are being told that to solve this problem we need more money, more spectrum, and new governance by way of a new government agency, bureau, whatever we want to call it. Frankly, I don't think any of those solve the problems. I don't know what the problem is, but that's why we're having these hearings. Seems to me, just adding, if you aren't using the 24 megahertz properly or efficiently, why would we give you 10 more? Doesn't make sense to me. If 13 billion hasn't solved the problem, then what is? These seem to be overly simplistic requests to solve a problem. I think the problems are much deeper than this. The second point I want to make is we've been pushed, continually asked, why don't we just take up the Senate bill? Well, the Senate bill, I don't think, really attacks or goes to the problem, and I'm not going to apologize. I will defend what this subcommittee is doing, is being diligent, asking the tough questions and trying to find the right answers to solve this problem. That's what our job is. And so I want to thank our subcommittee chairman and our full committee chairman for being diligent. Yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. We'll now go to the witnesses.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry. We won't go to the witnesses. We'll go to Mr. Waxman. My apologies. We now go to Mr. Waxman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for recognizing me. We have to be diligent, but we have to do more than that. We've got to solve this problem. The 10th anniversary of 9/11 is approaching within a few months. Our goal should be to have legislation on the President's desk to provide public safety with nationwide interoperable broadband before then, as a tribute to the brave first responders who risked their lives to save others. Although there's a broad agreement that we need to get this done, there are different views on the best way forward. Some want the FCC to auction the D block to a wireless provider and encourage collaboration between the winning bidder and public safety. Others want Congress to reallocate the D block to public safety. Both approaches could work, but recent developments appear to favor reallocation. The reallocation approach is strongly preferred by public safety leaders and President Obama, and it has bipartisan support in the House and the Senate. In particular, I want to commend Senator Rockefeller and Senator Hutchinson for their leadership. Senator Rockefeller has been a tireless champion of the reallocation approach and has put forth a discussion draft with Senator Hutchinson that is worthy of our careful consideration. Their bipartisan draft goes a long way towards addressing concerns about governance, accountability, interoperability, and how we pay for the public safety network. Last month, I approached Chairman Upton and Chairman Walden and suggested that we emulate our Senate counterparts and work together on a bipartisan House bill that would provide for a nationwide public safety network and make new spectrum available through incentive auctions. I hope they will take us up on this offer. I appreciate the fact that doing this right is complex and challenging, but with the 10th anniversary fast approaching, we need to settle on a path forward and move quickly. And the only way that's going to happen is if we do it together on a bipartisan basis. There's no reason why Congress cannot act before this somber anniversary. This hearing is an important step in this process. We have a panel of distinguished experts before us today, and I look forward to their testimony. Mr. Chairman, I want to yield the balance of my time to my colleague from California, Ms. Matsui.
I thank the ranking member for yielding to me, and I also like to thank our witnesses for being with us today. This is our second hearing on spectrum this year, and I understand we'll have a third next week. As we continue to consider spectrum policy, it is my hope that some of the outstanding issues out there will be answered so we can move forward and determine how best to proceed in a bipartisan manner. I plan to follow up on my questions from the last spectrum hearing we had last month regarding who will govern and oversee the public safety network that will ultimately possess significant responsibilities. It will have responsibility over highly valuable spectrum and significant public funding, not to mention needing to ensure the success of this vitally important network for first responders. That being said, we must provide public safety with interoperable capabilities they need and deserve to protect our nation during challenging times. We are all very cognizant as we approach the 10th anniversary of the tragic events of September 11th. It is not acceptable that our nation does not have a public safety communication system with a nationwide level of interoperability in place. More recently, we are seeing how tragic events, such as the tornadoes in the Midwest, have hampered emergency communications efforts in some areas. While we will debate the merits on how to fund and construct a nationwide public safety system, we can all agree that we must find a path that provides the funding required to build an interoperable system that fulfills the needs and securities of our public safety goals. We must also do it in a fiscally responsible manner. It won't be easy, but we must get there, and we must get there soon. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentlelady. We'll move on now to the witnesses. Get this order right. We'll start with Mr. Steinberg. We appreciate your willingness to come and testify, the Chief Technology Officer for Motorola Solutions. Sir, please, you know how to use a microphone. So, yeah, if anybody can't figure out the microphones, that's going to be at least a 2 meg penalty on your spectrum. Mr. Steinberg, go ahead. But I think you actually have to push it. Does it light up? Try it. You may have to get real close to these microphones. Nope. Nope. Maybe we should grab that other microphone. Why don't you just grab Mr. Martinez's microphone if it'll move there. Maybe we can get our technical people in here and rewire the whole process. And, get real close if you get. Well, exactly. Yeah. No, we got to get a microphone that works here. Do we have some technical people that? Somebody. Mr. Hanley, will you try your microphone?
Testing one.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Why don't we start with Mr. Hanley, and we'll have our technical operations officers come and fix Mr. Steinberg's microphone, Mr. Martinez's microphone.
Mr. Chairman, we may be able to set an example by sharing if we can't get it to work right.
Yeah, okay. All right. So let's go to Mr. Hanley first while we get the mics fixed. Vice President, Technology, Planning, and Services for Telephone and Data Services. Mr. Hanley, please go ahead.
Thank you. Chairman Walden, Chairman Upton, Ranking Member Eshoo, Ranking Member Waxman, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide U.S. Cellular's perspectives on this important issue. Today's topic is of great importance to all of us. as citizens who rely on our first responders for our safety, and as consumers and businesses that need mobile broadband to create jobs and compete in the global economy. The public interest requires a strategy that can deliver on both of these goals. First, we must provide nationwide interoperable broadband services for public safety. This network must serve the entire nation, not just a few select communities, and it must be provided at the lowest cost to taxpayers by leveraging commercial operators' networks, capabilities, and shared use of the spectrum, as well as harnessing market forces to reduce the cost of devices and equipment. Second, we must expand competitive broadband services for consumers. Broadband is a powerful catalyst for economic growth. However, spectrum is increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few carriers, and more spectrum is needed to ensure the availability of advanced services, competition, and consumer choice. The good news is that these two goals are highly complementary, and your decision does not have to be couched as for one and against the other. Shared networks and shared use mean lower costs and better services for all users of the network. Also, the D block and the public safety block share the same band class 14, in the LTE standard. In today's world, public safety agencies may pay several $1,000s for a single handset that works on public safety-only networks. The economies created by combining the commercial and public safety user base will drive cost-effective equipment for this band and enable public safety to benefit from the ongoing innovation driven by the commercial market. FCC studies also point to the benefits of the shared network approach. An FCC white paper concluded that a standalone public safety network would cost as much as $20 billion more by failing to leverage commercial resources and technologies. Now, a casual observer of this protracted debate might conclude that it all boils down to a binary choice between holding an auction for D-block licenses versus reallocating the spectrum to public safety. In fact, neither approach ensures nor precludes the optimal network build and operation. Rather, each approach requires that Congress and the FCC adopt a framework promoting regional partnerships that leverage the best commercial networks in each area. This framework must ensure that, 1, sufficient funding is available to build, operate, and maintain a high-quality network in rural and urban areas. 2, public safety enters into partnerships with commercial operators that leverage the experience and network assets of those operators. 3, the network is designed to be fully interoperable and is deployed and used with spectral efficiency in mind, recognizing the scarcity of this national resource. And 4, fair long-term opportunities are provided for a range of qualified commercial operators to partner with public safety, and those operators can use available capacity on the network wherever feasible. In conclusion, Congress and the FCC must go beyond choosing between holding an auction of D-block licenses and reallocating the spectrum to public safety. U.S. Cellular is prepared to support either approach, provided the needed safeguards are adopted. Without those safeguards, we all risk missing the opportunity that is before us today. An incomplete solution could result in sporadic coverage that favors urban markets and leaves rural communities behind, needlessly inflates the cost of equipment for public safety users, permits the inefficient use of the spectrum, fails to spur competition, and adds to the burden on the taxpayer. The worst course of action, however, is continued inaction. While we have studied and debated the right course to take, we have left the D block and most of the public safety block idle. This inaction has meant no interoperable public safety network. It has foreclosed spectrum for commercial uses, and it has deprived the federal treasury as well as public safety of revenues from this spectrum. Now is the time to advance the two complementary goals of meeting public safety needs and expanding competitive wireless broadband services for consumers by adopting a framework that encourages shared public-private networks and regional public-private partnerships. Thank you for the opportunity to provide this testimony, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Handley. We'll go next to Mr. Imlay, who is the General Counsel for the American Radio Relay League, known more informally as the ham radio operator. So, Mr. Imlay, we're glad to have you here. We look forward to your testimony, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairman Walden and members of the committee. It's a great honor and a privilege to appear before you today and to represent the interest of the 700,000 amateur radio operators in the United States. We are not first responders, but we're proud to provide support communications emergency restoration communications, and emergency temporary interoperability communications for first responders and for those involved in local and regional disaster relief. The ARRL has memoranda of understanding with FEMA, with the National Communications System, the Department of Defense, with the American National Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and the National Weather Service. And we routinely are involved in that period of time during and immediately after the occurrence of a natural disaster in the United States when communication systems are disrupted, overloaded, or fail. We are very much supportive of both the creation of a nationwide interoperable broadband network for public safety. It's been proven to be an absolute necessity, and we're also supportive of the allocation of the D block to public safety as well. In the immediate aftermath of a natural disaster, the ability of any network to provide interoperable communications is going to necessitate a certain amount of bandwidth. Bandwidth translates into the ability of public safety officials to communicate large volumes of traffic, which are the inevitable need for immediate post-disaster communications. There is before the subcommittee now H.R. 607, which provides for both the creation of a nationwide broadband network and for the reallocation of the D block to public safety. Those are admirable goals, and the amateur radio community supports them. The problem, though, with H.R. 607 is that Section 207D of that bill provides uniquely for a commercial auction and reallocation of the 420 to 440 megahertz and 450 to 470 megahertz bands. They're referred to in the bill as paired bands, but they're really not. The concept apparently behind that Section 207D is that as a quid pro quo for the allocation of the D block, these two segments of spectrum would be reallocated and auctioned and as a means of paying for the creation of the broadband network using the D block. The problem is that those frequency segments would displace a number of critical uses. In addition to the amateur service in the 420 to 440 megahertz band, the United States government uses that band for military radars, including pave-pause radars for early detection of offshore surface-launched missiles. And they also use the band for airborne radars for drug interdiction purposes. In the 450 to 470 megahertz segment, there are many thousands of business and industrial radio uses which supports small business in the United States for dispatch communications. Broadcast radio stations use that segment for remote pickup units to provide breaking news to the American public. The band is used for security and alarm systems for the station monitoring security industry. And there are many other uses. These are not public safety allocations, and the displacement of all of these important uses in these two band segments is not necessary to the creation of an interoperable public safety network. We urge the deletion of Section 207D of H.R. 607 if the subcommittee decides to use this version of this legislation in any future markup, and we're grateful for the opportunity to bring these to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Imlay. We appreciate your testimony. It's part of why we're having these hearings, to find out who's using what spectrum and the various issues. Mr. Steinberg, I've been advised you should test your microphone and see if it works now.
How's that?
Keep talking.
Keep talking? I'll keep talking.
All right.
Still talking.
All right. All right, Mr. Hanley, would you just help us out here and move your mic down to Mr. Steinberg? Would you like me to just speak loudly? No, because it's...
Testing.
There we go. Is yours working, Mr. Martinez? Okay. All right.
Okay.
Let's go to that one. We'll dump those two. Then we'll get back on. Don't pull too hard. You have to get out a soldering iron. Mr. Steinberg, please go ahead now.
Thank you, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, and other members of the subcommittee for this opportunity to testify on the topic of interoperable public safety communications. My name is Paul Steinberg, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Motorola Solutions Incorporated. Prior to my current position, I worked in Motorola Networks, where I was our Chief Architect for cellular and broadband commercial infrastructure products serving customers such as Verizon and Sprint Nextel. Motorola Solutions, formerly Motorola Incorporated, has been committed to innovation in communications and electronics for more than 80 years. Motorola has served the public safety sector continuously over these 8 decades, and the company is very proud of its history in this regard. Motorola has remained committed to the marketplace and has listened closely to the needs of public safety and providing public safety with reliable, state-of-the-art equipment and innovative solutions. There are 3 key points that I would like to emphasize from my written testimony. Point number 1. Based upon our detailed analysis, public safety will need broadband capacity that will surpass what will be afforded by the 10 megahertz of Public Safety Spectrum Trust spectrum alone. We recently confirmed this by working with public safety officials on network capacity analyses to understand how broadband networks can enhance emergency response and better protect the safety of all involved. During these scenarios, we found that a network infrastructure based solely on the existing 10 megahertz public safety allocation will struggle to provide the necessary capacity over time. Adding the additional 10 megahertz D-block spectrum would effectively double the network capacity for public safety and improve incident response. It is important to remember that not only is the catastrophic event that benefits from this increased spectrum, day-to-day situations ranging from an overturned gasoline tanker on an expressway, storms and tornadoes, hostage situations in a residence can all benefit from the enhanced situational awareness, command and control, and that is enabled through this additional spectrum. Point number 2. FCC Chairman Ganikowski has stated as recently as last Thursday at the TIA conference that broadband spectrum needs are predicted to grow 35 times in the next few years. Consumer use and demand for broadband application is indeed exploding, as are public safety's broadband requirements. Point number 3. There are additional costs that need to be factored into an auction scenario that we believe will quickly offset the proceeds of an auction. These costs are driven by 2 main items. The need for additional capacity that public safety will have to secure and pay for from carriers as they exhaust the 10 megahertz of capacity. A little known fact is that today public safety spends about $2 billion annually for carrier services, and an independent analyst projects that this will climb to over $5 billion annually in 5 years. The second incremental cost is the need to mitigate interference between a commercially operated D-block and the adjacent PSST band. The equipment cost, or capital expenditure, to build out a 20 megahertz LTE network with the D-block allocated is basically the same as to build out a 10 megahertz LTE network. However, the cost to build the network with 10 megahertz initially and then add additional spectrum later will be considerably more. We all share a common goal of equipping our first responders with the best and most innovative technology possible so that they can safely and effectively perform their mission. In order to achieve this, we at Motorola Solutions certainly support a commitment to nationwide interoperability, leverage of commercial standards such as 3GPP LTE, and private-public partnership. These need to be coupled with sound spectrum policy. We have a unique opportunity to carve out spectrum that provides the best current capabilities and economics for public safety while maximizing future options as the technology evolves. So, in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Eshoo, and other members of the subcommittee, Motorola Solutions welcomes the opportunity to compete in a standards-based environment to help public safety realize its vision to have a truly interoperable nationwide broadband network. We look forward to working with the subcommittee to further realize our shared vision of a competitive market providing innovative solutions for public safety communications. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Steinberg. We appreciate your participation in the hearing. Dr. Martinez, we will go to you next, Chief Technology Officer with Harris RF Communications Division. We appreciate your being here as well, sir.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the committee. First, let me thank you for inviting me to testify about key steps that must be achieved rapidly to develop and deploy a truly interoperable nationwide public safety broadband network. Let me begin by first introducing you to the Harris Corporation. Harris is an international communications and information technology company serving commercial and government markets worldwide. Headquartered in Melbourne, Florida, the company has approximately 16,000 employees, annual revenues of approximately $6 billion, and nearly 7,000 engineers and scientists. Harris is a leading global supplier of secure radio communications products, services, and systems, embedded high-grade encryption software and products for the military, government, and public safety purposes. Harris is a pioneer in the development of Internet Protocol or IP-based networks for private radio, broadband applications. We supply the industry with leading market-leading narrowband, broadband, and wideband network services and devices. I serve as the CTO of Harris Corporation's RF Communications Division. I also chair the FCC's Emergency Response Interoperability Center, Public Safety Advisory Committee, Security and Authentication Workgroup. I have spent most of my career bringing advanced technologies to public safety, national defense, and homeland security markets. In these roles, I've learned how leveraging commercial technology innovation can have a profound impact on our nation's ability to procure and deploy state-of-the-art products and services for these mission-critical markets. I have also seen that a robust supply chain, fostered by appropriate business models and multi-source procurement practices, must be implemented to ensure that all levels of government will procure these capabilities in a cost-effective manner. Today, smartphones, supported by a vast ecosystem of application providers, have unleashed enormous capabilities of modern 3G and 4G wireless networks. These capabilities literally are revolutionizing the socio-economic structure of the world. However, our nation's first responders, charged with protecting lives and property, are not yet able to take full advantage of this capability. Public safety must be enabled to leverage broadband technology in ways that will leverage and significantly enhance their ability to perform their missions. It's time for our nation to build this hardened, nationwide interoperable broadband network in the 700 megahertz dedicated spectrum. We support the reallocation of D-block spectrum public safety, and we commend Congress's examination of this critical issue. Two key ingredients: policies that have opened the 700 megahertz broadband spectrum public safety and the availability of broadband technology now enable construction of this nationwide network. It's now time to finalize the two final elements: governance and procurement. The broadband network, properly constructed, will serve first responders and government agencies charged with public safety mission, and this involves federal, state, local, and tribal organizations. Establishing a governance structure to ensure nationwide interoperability among these organizations is essential. While we must provide this interoperability capability, we must also ensure that we are addressing the interoperability requirements that are unique to each of those organizations. For example, the city of Los Angeles, by virtue of its size, population, and geographic location, has needs that differ from a smaller inland location such as Bend, Oregon. A key goal in creating relevant governance structure for all is to ensure that these stakeholders can participate in the establishment process and ongoing governance structure that is created. The activities of the Commission, FCC Commission in the past, and ongoing rulemaking are to be applauded. They serve as a model in governance in matters outside of their jurisdictional authority. As a governance entity must oversee all aspects of the network throughout its life cycle, through design, implementation, operations, and maintenance. That entity must ensure implementation of a procurement model that ensures the achievement of nationwide interoperability. In this regard, we must now finalize a regulatory framework and determine what interoperability means as a threshold matter. Considerable time and effort has been spent defining interoperability from technical and operational perspectives. Here, we want to discuss what interoperability means from the perspective of governance and procurement. Indeed, technical and operational considerations alone will not yield the desired outcome. Let me repeat, indeed, technical and operational considerations alone will not yield the desired outcome. We can draw from many examples of success in the commercial world. As consumers and users in the commercial world, we understand what this means. It means we can procure these items in an open, competitive environment. Our expectations drive the need not just for interoperability, but beyond that, interchangeability. We choose the device that suits our needs. on the network that provides the services that we require in a highly competitive and innovative market. Market demands drive commercial service providers to deliver interoperability. In turn, commercial service providers drive interchangeability throughout their supply chain to ensure uninterrupted availability of competitive and innovative products. Their business success relies on having multiple sources within their supply chain. This is the model that should guide the governance, structure, and procurement process for this network. In this way, interoperability will become not just the mandate, it will become the outcome. Interoperability, therefore, is the ability to procure devices, network element building blocks that are fully interchangeable. This definition will allow our first responders to purchase equipment in a highly competitive and innovative environment. They can purchase this equipment with confidence that it will plug and play. Creating this market dynamic will require funding mechanisms that drive this procurement model. And finally, let me close by saying that it is essential that we ensure economic viability of the public safety broadband network. The need for federal funds to launch the initiative is well understood. Also understood are the challenges in this difficult financial time. Here we want to briefly discuss how these challenges can be alleviated. First is the benefit of leveraging a vast commercial ecosystem. Second is to realize the savings that will come about through a competitive business practice, a competitive procurement process. And third is that we will move to a converged network with converged devices, and the convergence process itself will save enormous costs in the future. In conclusion, the public safety broadband network will bring unprecedented capabilities to our nation's first responders and agencies that support the public safety mission. Built on a competitive market and the latest broadband standards, supported by this large ecosystem, this network will enable interoperability to become a reality. Once again, Mr. Chairman, I want to applaud the committee's leadership on this issue, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to working with you in the future to make this a reality. Thank you,
Dr. Martinez. We appreciate your testimony and comments. We're going to go now to Mr. Johnson, Jeffrey Johnson, Chief Executive, Western Fire Chiefs Association, on behalf of the Public Safety Alliance, and a great Oregon fire leader. So we're delighted to have you here. Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee. I am Jeff Johnson, immediate past president of the International Association of Fire Chiefs and the Chief Executive of the Western Fire Chiefs Association, and today I testify on behalf of the Public Safety Alliance, which represents 9 associations representing all the leadership in the public safety community. In the past 50 years, America's domestic defenders have been allocated thin slices of spectrum in each new band as it became available. That is why today we have more than 55,000 public safety agencies, each operating its own mission-critical radio system over 6 or more different radio bands. Connecting disparate frequency slices among and between agencies and jurisdictions to achieve interoperability requires the purchase, programming, and deployment of electronic patching equipment operating under a governing protocol. This makes our goal of interoperability limited, difficult, and expensive.
Mr. Johnson, let me stop you for a second. Can you try your mic? Apparently we're having...
Testing. 1, 2.
I can hear mine over this system. Oh.
I could do stereo.
You expect us to solve this other problem. Why don't we pause for a second? So do you have it back in your system yet? Do you? rest of us you're not hearing.
Now I'm hearing you.
Now you're hearing me. Oh, well, let's start the hearing over then. Got it. All right. Mr. Johnson, if you'd like to resume your testimony. I apologize for the interruption.
Thank you, sir. Following numerous major events and other significant disasters which demonstrate communications failures, we know that a new model is necessary. Required is a national architecture for public safety wireless communications. To create and construct a nationwide public safety wireless broadband network, 3 key ingredients are requisite. The D-block spectrum, number 1. Number 2, federal funding. And number 3, a governance structure which makes it all operate. To achieve connectivity coast to coast and border to border, the 10 megahertz block of D-block spectrum currently slated for auction by the FCC must be added to the 10 megahertz of spectrum licensed to public safety to build out a network with sufficient capacity. Local control of the network by public safety agencies is critical. Utilizing a single technology with adequate spectrum will ensure nationwide interoperability and allow us to effectively manage day-to-day operations as well as major events. Public safety expects to enter into a public-private partnership with states, counties, local government agencies, federal partners, utilities, and other agencies such as water and highways who respond to emergency incidents routinely. But public safety must have control over the operation of the network in real time to give public safety assurance that they will have full, preemptive priority over its spectrum on a when-needed basis. The network must be mission critical from the outset. In the beginning, this system will handle only data and video. At some future time, years away, we believe there will be a migration to mission critical voice over this broadband network. This migration will happen only when technology is developed and tested and public safety has confidence in it and it's affordable. Funding is important for the build-out of the public safety broadband network. The Public Safety Alliance supports the auction of spectrum by the FCC from incentive auctions, auctions of the unsold portion of the advanced wireless spectrum, or auctions of designated federal spectrum with the proceeds priority marked for funding the construction, operation, maintenance of a nationwide public safety network. A governance structure must be created to manage and operate this new nationwide public safety broadband network. Key among the 7 Public Safety Alliance guiding principles listed in my written testimony are, number 1, that public safety first responder delegates constitute a majority of the governing body. And second, the public safety's 10 megahertz and the D-block 10 megahertz will be combined under a single license issued to the governing body. Public safety is supported in its quest for the D-block by the Big 7, the 7 national associations which represent state and local governments. We're also supported by 2 top U.S. telecommunications carriers, as well as primary manufacturers of telecommunications equipment. The 9/11 Commission recommended in its report that interoperable communication system be established for public safety. At a Senate hearing on March 30th, former Commission Chairman Governor Thomas Keene said, and I quote, "We support the immediate allocation of the D-block spectrum to public safety. We must not approach these urgent matters at a leisurely pace. We don't know when the next attack or disaster will strike. Further delay is intolerable. We urge Congress to act," end quote. Mr. Chairman, I thank you and this subcommittee for today's hearing on this vital issue for public safety. I am looking forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We appreciate your testimony as well. Now we'll go for our final witness, Mr. Joe Hanna, President of Directions. Mr. Hanna, welcome, and hopefully your microphone works.
Let's hope so. Chairman Walden and Ranking Member Eshoo, members of the committee, my name is Joe Hanna, and I currently serve as President of Directions, which is a public safety-focused wireless telecommunications consulting practice. Prior to starting this practice, I retired from public safety communications and the public policy arena after 30 years of service. The comments I've prepared for today's hearing are solely my views and should not be construed as representing any client or past affiliation. I operate from the assumption that everyone in this room agrees that our first responders should have the tools they need to serve the public, including access to state-of-the-art communication systems. Some of us, however, fail to agree on the fact that there are 2 distinct and viable paths that can provide public safety with the wireless broadband services that they need and deserve. Congress has provided public safety with 24 megahertz of spectrum in the 700 meg band. If prudently utilized, this allocation can provide public safety with the capacity they need for day-to-day needs. Using that capacity in conjunction with commercial spectrum in the 700 megahertz band, as proposed in the FCC's National Broadband Plan, will give public safety the bandwidth necessary for situations in which the public safety allocation may become overloaded. The difference between those pressing the reallocation of the D block to public safety and that of the paradigm envisioned in the National Broadband Plan is that the LTE platform, now standardized as the interoperable vehicle for a public safety network, provides an automatic, seamless, priority accessible mechanism that can be triggered in the event of an overload of the baseline public safety network. Equally as important, partnering with commercial entities, a cornerstone of the National Broadband Plan, will allow first responders to take advantage of both reductions in the cost of building the core network while taking advantage of the benefits of commercial networks and the economies of scale for user devices needed by the first responders. I wholeheartedly agree with my public safety counterparts that the core of this proposed public safety broadband network should be centered around a dedicated public safety grade broadband network, and this network should recognize no distinction between urban, suburban, and rural boundaries. My fellow panelists and I also seem to agree that the widespread financial crisis facing cities, counties, and states throughout the nation will not allow America to realize the nationwide implementation of a dedicated public safety network without an infusion of federal funds. I would also like to note that several legislative proposals that have emerged around this debate the past year will help public safety use the spectrum that they've been allocated more effectively by providing for the flexible use of 700 megahertz public safety spectrum currently allocated for narrowband communications. Failure to provide this flexibility will result in critically needed spectrum lying fallow in many parts of the nation. The greatest flaw that I see in reallocation of the D block to public safety in lieu of the current law and the proposals of the National Broadband Plan, however, will be the unintended consequences of creating an island ecosystem. With no commercial economies of scale, public safety will again find itself held hostage by a limited number of providers, resulting in the same low-volume, high-cost marketplace faced every day in the public safety land mobile environment. Additionally, budget estimates for a public safety network as calculated for the National Broadband Plan were based on a model in which the dedicated public safety network would be built in conjunction with commercial rollouts of LTE networks. The broadband cost estimates for a standalone public network more than triples the cost of a shared deployment. With a shortfall in federal funds, public safety will be faced with a difficult choice of determining either how to ask Congress for billions of additional dollars of funding or to choose where the network will be built and where it will not be built. Instead of building a bridge to nowhere, we're now faced with building half a bridge, then forcing either the unnecessary expenditure of additional billions of dollars to complete the bridge or leaving a substantial portion of America's first responders without the broadband services they deserve. One of the most significant issues that must be addressed by any legislation considered by this Congress is the provision for a well-defined governance and administrative structure that will be required for the deployment of this initiative. Let there be no doubt, this proposed multi-billion-dollar venture is massively complex. If we fail to adequately address the issue of governance and administration of this effort at the outset, we guarantee extended delays in implementation, massive needless cost, and failure to have services implemented nationwide in an acceptable time frame. Last, we must be cognizant of the fact that we have other equally pressing public safety communication demands that must not be overlooked as precious and limited federal resources are budgeted. Subcommittee members Shimkus and Eshoo, who are both co-founders of the Next Generation 911 Caucus, are well-versed in the needs of the nation's public safety answer points to upgrade their 911 capabilities to bridge this critical link in the public safety continuum. At the end of the day, we must all recognize the fact that there's a finite pool of funds, and we must ensure that we responsibly address the myriad telecommunications requirements needed to serve both the public and our first responders. Again, I would like to thank you for the invitation to speak before this committee, and I will be glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanna. I appreciate your comments, your testimony. I really think we've got a terrific panel of witnesses that really span the spectrum of the topic we're discussing today, from the technical level to the user level. And so we appreciate all your testimony. I would ask unanimous consent. We have 2 letters from the FCC Chairman Janikowski in response to congressional inquiries on public safety equipment. We have Motorola's response to the same letter to the FCC and a report from the Congressional Research Service on federal funds spent on public safety radios. I ask unanimous consent that they be made part of the record. And I would recommend to my colleagues on the committee on both sides to take advantage of actually reading these documents. A lot of work's gone into the answers, which I think will play into whatever we do legislatively. I'll start off with questions. Mr. Hanley, first of all, I want to confirm a statement that you made that a standalone public safety network would cost in the order of $20 billion. Was that what you testified to?
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Please turn on your...
It's lit. I'm not... Okay.
There you go.
There you
Just
go.
get real close
Better?
to it.
All right. Yeah. I think I was referencing the FCC's analysis of that question. You know, clearly a network that leverages existing cell towers, existing radio equipment, is going to be much more cost effective than one that starts from scratch.
All right. I want to ask you and Mr. Hanna, part of what we're looking here at is the 24 megahertz that public safety was given as part of DTV. 10 of it's currently, as I understand it, being used for broadband. There's a 2 megahertz sort of barrier wall between that and push-to-talk technology. As we look at that, it looks to me like at some point in time there's another at least 12 megahertz that could be dedicated to broadband and perhaps LTE, whatever, which is more than what we're talking about in D block. So I guess the question I'm trying to resolve is what can be done today with 10 megahertz of broadband spectrum, and might that be enough to close this gap in terms of technology and migrate everybody into an interoperable broadband network that uses that 10 megahertz that's now, frankly, not being very efficiently used, although push-to-talk's a communication. I mean, I got all that, but with the new technology. So, you know, we're talking 2 to 3 million users, not 100 million users like some of the commercial providers have on 10 megs. So could that 10 or 12 megs be used for broadband and satisfy this interoperable need? Mr. Hanna, do you want to start, and then Mr. Hanley?
Well, I think the question is well asked. There is unfortunately a conflict with part of the spectrum at the 700 meg public safety allocation, and that is that there are, although not widely deployed, there are a number of large 700 meg narrowband systems already deployed or in the process of being deployed. So that spectrum is being built out already.
Is that an efficient use of that spectrum?
Well, it was.
When we look at LTE and all in the future? I mean, that's part of this. Aren't we creating new islands?
I think in the long term, certainly, and Chief Johnson mentioned this as well, in the long term, I think we could certainly make better use of it if that were ultimately moved into the broadband allocation. Unfortunately, right now, there simply is not a technology in play that would allow broadband mission-critical voice communications there. So
would that apply also then to the other 10 in the D block?
Absolutely. At this stage, I mean, at this stage, there is nothing on the table for mission-critical voice in the broadband allocation.
And so what would the time horizon be for mission-critical voice in that allocation?
As Chief Johnson mentioned, and I would echo, it is down the road a ways, because at this
What does that mean, 3 to 5 years?
I would say 5 to 10 at least.
All right. Mr. Hanley, do you want to, I don't mean to cut you off, but we have limited time here. Mr. Hanley?
Yeah, I would concur with what Mr. Hanna said. I think that we should envision the narrowband spectrum being used down the road to augment the broadband spectrum, and we should have a definitive plan for addressing that migration as soon as it's practicable to do so. I think in the short run, whether the 10 megahertz is sufficient depends on the model that's built around it. If we have roaming capabilities with other spectrum, that may be a way of augmenting the 10 megahertz. The way the network is designed and architected could also make more efficient use of 10 megahertz allocation.
You know, part of our discussion, too, is about the equipment. And from my days, either as an amateur radio operator, as a broadcaster who sent both your companies money over time, good equipment. I had the rock-solid Motorola in the trunk of the mobile unit we had on a base station. But I also know that the commercial side spins out equipment a lot cheaper for mass use. We've got a letter, and maybe my colleague's going to address this as my time's running out, from the FCC that did that evaluation, where some of the hardened equipment for public safety comes in at $5,000, and the same sort of communication device on the private commercial side, maybe a couple $100. So I won't ask it because my time's expired, but it's an issue I think we have to dig into. Say, can you get capability with greater innovation more often at a tenth of the cost of what we're all paying as taxpayers today? My time's expired. I'll recognize the gentlelady from California for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each one of you for your excellent testimony today. I think it's been highly instructive for the members of the subcommittee. Let me just pick up where the chairman left off, because in this this is a report. This is from the Federal Communications Commission. This is on the cost of public safety communications. It says that this is at least partly because public safety, going back to the costs, is unable to capture the benefits of competition and economies of scale associated with equipment and devices that are manufactured for the commercial consumer marketplace. Commission staff expect that leveraging the commercial mass market could reduce costs for public safety devices substantially. These are substantial cost differentials here. So who would like to comment on this? Maybe we should go to Motorola first, since there's some questions surrounding how competitive this whole area is. You mentioned in your testimony that you looked forward to a competitive market. I don't know how you define that, but you want to speak to the costs on this, just very briefly? And anyone else want to lean in on it?
Sure.
Looks like we're going to be picking up the tab on this, so we have to pay attention to the costs.
Is this working at all?
Yeah,
Yeah,
speak
okay.
louder, though.
Okay, thank you.
We're dying for your answer.
Thank you for the question. It's
sure. No, go ahead.
Something that's going around a lot, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. The numbers, the ASPs are thousands of dollars less on average than what are typically quoted, and we do compete competitively for all products. For example, with
well, where does this figure come from then? I mean, do you disagree with this? Is this what the FCC's estimates that a state-of-the-art consumer cellular device typically costs a few $100s? A typical land mobile radio for public safety communications may cost as much as $5,000. Is that false?
So I disagree with the $5,000 number.
So how much is it?
It's considerably less than that.
What is considerably less?
If I could please.
No, I don't have a lot of time. So if you want to answer it, fine. If not, I'm going to go to someone else.
So we'll be happy to get back to you with the specific data, and that's not my area of expertise.
Thank you. To Dr. Martinez, thank you for your testimony. And I think that you centered in on the two areas that are so critical, and that is governance and procurement. I think you really were helpful to us in how you built your testimony. Obviously, interoperability is vital to a seamless communication system, and the FCC has recently mandated that all public safety broadband networks adopt the LTE as a common technology platform. What, in your view, are additional safeguards that are needed to promote competition in the public safety equipment market?
Yes, Congresswoman, thank you. We need to learn from the success of the commercial telecom industry. That industry has succeeded in innovating rapidly, bringing capability to market quickly, providing a cost-effective solution. And how have they done that? Well, they do that through a very competitive process. And we call that process multi-sourcing, which means that they look at every major component, subsystem of their networks, and they ensure that they have a multiple sources of supply. They do not engage in sole source practices. They frequently do not single source. Multi-sourcing is the answer because it provides for a competitive
But how
environment.
do we, if I might, how do we ensure that the equipment market keeps pace with the innovation taking place in the commercial sector?
The first step, of course, was to adopt the Common Platform, LTE. That was the first step. Pretty much unanimous support in the record for that decision on the Commission's part. Now, having done that, we can't do it halfways. And we discussed this just yesterday in PSAC, and I believe it was a comment from Mr. Steinberg. We must do it all the way. We must continue to follow the standard as it evolves. We must leverage the ecosystem as it continues to develop. We must ensure that the same competitive practices that have made the carrier so successful are applied as we implement a governance organization or structure for the public safety network.
Great. I just want to get one more question, and thank you very much. To Chief Johnson, thank you for your testimony. At the same time that you advocate for local control of the network, which obviously is very important, and you mentioned that in your testimony, would there be a tension between the between a national governance structure and the local control that you testified?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think this is how we see it operating. The national governance body would set technology standards so that we have one technological approach to make sure that things work as they should. They would set standards and regulations for the network, but you're going to need, in some cases it may be a large city, in other places it may be statewide or maybe regional. The end point is we need local and regional presence for operating the dial, as it were. Public safety views these events and says we have to control the dial. When we need the network, we have to reach up figuratively and turn it over so public safety has access. And I don't expect there'll be tension between the two. I think, in fact, the local presence will make the national governance model stronger.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your questions. We'll turn now to the Vice Chair of the subcommittee, Mr. Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I can start off with thanking everybody. I agree with Mr. Walden that this is a pretty impressive panel and appreciate your expertise in sharing it with us. My question, it's really three parts to the same question of the shared system. And it may be too long with these three to actually get real answers from you, so if you guys would like to submit longer answers. But specifically to Mr. Hanna and Hanley, and I'll ask Mr. Hanley if there's enough time. Mr. Hanna, I'll let you, otherwise you and others could submit it. But can you comment on the specifics as to why a shared system built out of the network is less expensive than the one in which a standalone public safety one would be? And would this shared system also, we talked about the 12 for narrowband, 2 for guarding, and 10 for broadband of the current 24 that's been set aside through the digital transition. Are you talking about those 24 plus the 10 to set up a shared system? And then last, I think one of the ultimate questions is taking all levels of an emergency from your basic wreck on the interstate to a 9/11 or Birmingham or Joplin where systems are wiped out of a complete city. Is there a risk in a shared system that at a time of an emergency that public safety wouldn't have enough of the spectrum to operate in both narrow and broadband areas? So, Mr. Hanley,
okay.
Three questions.
So first of all, I think that the shared network can be lower cost because it's going to leverage existing assets that network operators already have in place. It's going to leverage the capabilities that those operators have to efficiently operate networks and their know-how in those areas. I think those are the quick answers to that question. We can provide more detail in writing. Our vision of a shared, to your second question, our vision of a shared network involves the 20 megahertz of the D block and the adjacent public safety broadband license spectrum. So that's what we're talking about when we envision the 20 megahertz shared network, but other constructs certainly could be part of that as well. And then I think to your last question about different types of emergencies, I think that you can envision a number of operational constructs to be either developed in rules or negotiated between operators and public safety agencies to go as far as 100% utilization of the capacity in an emergency situation. I think that depends on the way the model is set up and what other resources the network operator has to serve its base of commercial customers.
Well, I think the first question certainly is that, you know, the cost the savings from co-location at the outset. I mean, if you're putting in two systems at the same time, same location, obviously there's some savings there. To the third question, I think there's a spin I haven't heard yet. If you're co-located or have a commercial partner, if you have a major disaster, so for example, what we witnessed the last few weeks of the tornadoes, in a public safety environment, at least in the initial deployments that I'm looking at, in one major jurisdiction, public safety was looking at building out 350 sites, which sounds like a lot. In that same jurisdiction, that same coverage area, one commercial carrier has 5,500 sites. So just by sheer numbers, if you have something like a tornado or an earthquake or whatever, the probability of having having sites in play, as well as effective use of spectrum in more sites, I think certainly gives you an advantage that you don't have in that standalone, purely hardened public safety network. There has to be that core public safety piece. Don't get me wrong there. I support that. But if you are co-locating and co-serving with a commercial partner, you gain the access to, in this case, thousands of additional sites that somebody else has already paid for.
30 seconds, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. I think the general discussion in the public safety community is, if we're allocated the 20 megahertz of spectrum, we fully intend to have a commercial partner for all the reasons my colleagues here have articulated. It would not be cost efficacious to go out and to replicate the kind of systems that exist out there. Some jurisdictions may want to, but we actually see, as part of the D-block approach, having a commercial partner. The last thing I think we want is to shut down and overwhelm a commercial system, because we are the output of the emergency response system, and the call from someone trapped in their collapsed house is the input. And to shut down either of those at the expense of either is not helpful to the system.
I believe next is Ms. Matsui. The list I have. Go ahead for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned in my opening statement, one of the important issues that I believe has not been fully addressed but is central to ensuring an efficient and effective public safety network is who will govern and oversee this vast network that possesses significant responsibilities. This question is to Chief Johnson and Mr. Hanley. In your opinion, who should oversee and possess ultimate responsibility and accountability for ensuring the development and deployment of a broadband public safety network and achievement of nationwide interoperability? Chief John.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We think that the provisions in S-28, the Rockefeller bill, come very close to what we envision, which is we wouldn't expect the federal government to fund a network and then not have some presence in terms of the governance model. So in that particular model, there's 4 cabinet-level positions in it. Second, public safety needs to have a prominent position in terms of the governance, and so do local governments for all the reasons I've articulated already. But lastly, we believe strongly that our private sector commercial partners and the people that are manufacturing the devices and can see over the horizon better than someone like myself, they need to be present and active as part of the governance model. So I think those are the 3 pieces.
Public-private, kind of a nonprofit sort of partnership here you're talking about?
Yeah, I think, Congresswoman, I don't know if I could articulate what is the best legal construct for the governance model, but I do think those 3 pieces have to be present in terms of who sets policy on the network.
Yeah, I would agree that there needs to be some level of national governance, and the Constitution that Chief Johnson mentioned is probably an appropriate representation. That a lot of the standards work needs to be overseen at that level. There may be applications that should be hosted on a nationwide basis. So I think it's a federal system in the end with governments from some type of national entity as well as a lot of local flavor.
Okay, seems like it's sort of floating at this point in time. And we don't want it to keep floating like this. So now, as we know, the current licensee of the existing 10 megahertz of the public safety broadband spectrum is the Public Safety Spectrum Trust. Chief Johnson and Mr. Hanna, if a new entity was to hold the license and be responsible for governance and oversight of the network, would you support transferring the Public Safety Spectrum Trust license to this new entity?
Yes, Congresswoman, we would.
Okay, and Mr. Hanna?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, and what would need to happen to ensure a smooth transition? Either of you want to comment on that?
Congresswoman, I think we'd have to lay out a pretty rational and detailed plan about how you transfer the license. There's all sorts of detail that have to be vetted at your level, frankly, and at the administrative level to make sure that we're legally going about it properly. And then that governance body is going to have to go to work about setting the standards and making sure that this thing deploys effectively.
Okay. Now, if we create a new entity to manage this public safety network, they'll have awesome responsibilities. And they'll have responsibility over highly valuable spectrum and significant public funding, not to mention needing to ensure the success of this vitally important network for first responders. Mr. Hanley, Dr. Martinez, and Chief Johnson, that said, how would we ensure accountability and success of any new entity to manage the public safety network? And Dr. Martinez first, if you would comment.
If you create an independent entity, then obviously, as you've stated in your question, that there is therefore a need to have a responsibility and accountability. That is certainly the challenge with an independent organization, a nonprofit organization, is how do you hold it accountable for spending taxpayers' precious funds? I would suggest to you it will require extensive oversight, certainly from bodies such as this one. It will require oversight and participation from the states and local entities to ensure that, first of all, their needs are being met in a responsible way, funds are being responsibly spent, as I've advocated earlier in my testimony, that they're procuring equipment in a competitive and open market. And therefore, it's going to require continued oversight from organizations such as this committee.
Right. Okay. Mr. Hanley?
I think, first of all, clear objectives that are agreed to by policymakers so that there's a clear benchmark against which the organization can be measured. I think the examples that Dr. Martinez cited are appropriate as well in terms of oversight. I think some type of an audit process would also be important to make that work.
Okay. Chief Johnson, just a quick comment because I'm running out of time.
I concur. I just think that we're going to have to lay this out very clearly when we charter the governance body with what our expectations and timelines are, and it has to have the mix we discussed, and we have to hold people accountable.
Well, thank you very much, and I think we're talking about something that's sort of theoretical now at this point that we're going to have to figure out how we deal with this. So I will continue to ask questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions and for the answers. I believe Mr. Bass actually was here when the gavel fell, and so you would be up next, Mr. Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's an interesting hearing, and appreciate the fact that the subcommittee is addressing this complex issue in a orderly and pragmatic manner, and I think these hearings are helpful to us understanding, what our side of the Capitol will do with this issue. Mr. Hanna and Chief Johnson and Dr. Martinez, can you explain to us or give us your perspective on why we still don't even have voice interoperability yet for public safety, let alone any broadband network? Chief Johnson?
Thank you, Congressman. I think it has its roots in the thin slices of spectrum that have been given to public safety over the years. So, and there were reasons that happened, but those reasons don't apply in this market today. Technology has surpassed the reason for doing that originally. So what happens is, in the street equivalent, it's like everybody's operating on their own road, and then the public expects us to cooperate and be co-productive at the local level when we respond. Now we need to talk. So what we've had to do is we've had to build lanes between our own roads, and it is such a broken model. I think the public safety community's perspective on this is we would love to stop spending money on interoperability. have a vision for national architecture, which we're articulating, and spend our money there rather than connecting these thin slices. And that makes so much sense on a lot of fronts. And most of all of those is this D-block spectrum paired with the 10 megahertz we have eventually will be capable of radio over IP communications, but it's capable of data. And it's contiguous to the 700 narrowband channels which we have. And what that allows us to do is it allows a single technological approach. And I think that's why we're focusing on moving away from the thin slices and spending money on interoperability and move to one swath that will help us get all of it done. And Mr. Chairman, if I might, with your pleasure, sir, we'd like to introduce one additional piece of communication from the Public Safety Alliance into the record, sir.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Mr. Handler. I mean, Dr. Mark, well, either one of you two guys.
You know, if we look at how $13 billion plus, that was at the federal level, plus what was spent at the state and local level, it is a large sum of money. The predominant practice has been really one of looking backwards. And by that we mean the predominant practice has been about focusing on operability, not interoperability. A significant amount of energy and emphasis spent on backwards compatibility as opposed to future interoperability. The procurement process has gone astray. It didn't focus on the core fundamental issue. We have to procure systems that are interoperable. You have to drive this car looking through the windshield, not through the rearview mirror. And so sad to say that most of that money was spent in a manner that did not move the ball as far forward as it could have and should have. We've learned that. We must not repeat that mistake.
I think it's a question of priorities and local resources. In the commercial sector, interoperability was essential from the beginning. Folks had to be able to roam and have a seamless experience wherever they went. It was imperative that we have interoperability. The focus has been on operability in the local incident environment in public safety. So I think that's the reason.
Mr. Steinberg, just a quick comment because I have other questions. Do you have any comments on this?
I mostly would agree with Chief Johnson. It's the fragmented spectrum that has been the root of the problems that we've had from the beginning. The only thing I would also offer is that we have made substantial progress, maybe albeit not as rapidly as we would have liked, on creating interoperable networks with the deployment of the APCO 25 standard across 27 states. We cited several instances of good practices where we are achieving many agencies of interoperability within a state, such as Michigan, Colorado, Ohio, Minnesota, San Diego, to name a few. So there has been some progress made, but more needs to be accomplished.
On the cost side, is there an appropriate division in responsibility between the federal government and state and local law enforcement or first responders? How much should the states and localities be responsible for? And I have 14 seconds left, so somebody answer it quickly.
Anytime you deploy a large system, this issue comes up, and the best way to answer it is I think all of us will end up contributing to it. The formula I don't have a great recommendation for you on, except that state and local governments have infrastructure that will drastically lower the cost of deploying if they share. And it's sharing backhaul, it's sharing towers and infrastructure, it's sharing building. All of those things will be contribute to lowering the cost of the system, and that may be the way they share, or they may share in real dollars.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your questions. We'll go now to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing, and thanks to all the panelists for your testimony. It's been very instructive. Chief Johnson, there's been a lot of discussion in recent years about the optimal nature of the spectrum at 700 megahertz band for broadband. The propagation characteristics of these frequencies allow wireless signals to penetrate buildings and other topographic obstacles while transmitting high-capacity data signals. If public safety owns the D block on the 700 megahertz band through a reallocation solution, how are you going to make sure that this spectrum will be used in the most efficient manner at all times?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. The spectrum that public safety has, we often hear about the 100 megahertz we have. About 50 megahertz of that's in 4.9. 4.9 is really good short distance to backhaul data, but is not good for penetrating buildings. It's not good for penetrating going through windows. And when the public safety community talks about how we feel about the 4.9, we're often saying that's the one we're least likely to use because its short distance would be cost prohibitive to build a tower network around it. So when we start talking about that to be the one we would be capable of relinquishing in terms of likelihood, the response we usually receive is, well, yeah, you want to give us back the one that isn't very useful on the street. And that's kind of our point, is it's not very useful. It's allocated to us, but it's not as useful as the 700 megahertz. So the 700 megahertz, the big advantage with that is the data is likely to perform the same as the voice does. And when the voice and the data perform the same, at street level I'm talking, then the police officer or firefighter are able to count on having voice access and data access. The minute they become dissimilar, then you quit relying on them. Say voice works and data doesn't. And that's a critical factor in terms of people actually using it at the street level. The 700 spectrum is optimal. It's optimal because of how the wave performs, and it's also optimal because it's beside our voice channels.
So how do we make sure, though, when you're not using, that we're getting the most efficient use of that whole spectrum, though?
Thank you, Congressman. I think the model we envision with a commercial partner would allow roaming onto that network while that spectrum is not being used. And what that would do is that would generate some enterprise money, which would help offset the cost of operating the system and building the system and dealing with some of the technological flipovers that will naturally occur.
Thank you. Mr. Steinberg and maybe Dr. Martinez and Chief Johnson also, the size of the public safety community is routinely described as consisting of about 3 million first responders, and you know, if we look at a smaller subset, maybe 500,000 or so that actually are in the field and are in need of mobile communications. So I'm just curious, why is Verizon's 22 megahertz of the 700 spectrum sufficient to launch its 4G LTE service to 100 million subscribers, yet you need almost that same amount for public safety? Why is that?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. There are several reasons why that's different. We're really kind of somewhat comparing apples to oranges here, if I may. The public safety networks are built to be ultimately resilient and reliable, such that if even the complete network has failed, the devices can communicate with each other. That's part of the reason for the additional cost that was alluded to earlier in the handsets. They're engineered to a different grade of service, a different resiliency. So the way that they use the spectrum and the mode of communication is considerably different. The network service level that it's engineered to is considerably higher, especially from a coverage point of view and a grade of service that it provides to the end users overall.
Dr. Martinez, do you have any?
You know, in scientific terms, the problem is that communications in public safety is very lumpy in time and space. A good day is not when you use the spectrum efficiently, i.e. you're utilizing it heavily. That's a bad day. That means lots of things are going wrong. You can't apply the same metrics to the spectrum efficiency utilization in a commercial carrier network that public safety has. The issue in public safety is not one of global capacity. It is when an incident happens, you need localized, high-capacity communications. And that is the problem. And you don't know where incidents happen, so therefore we have to create that capacity everywhere because an event can happen any place, as we all know.
Right.
That's the fundamental problem in comparing those two business cases.
Thank you. Chief?
Congressman, I think to compare commercial and public safety use, I guess I would say commercial systems are more likely to have broad use throughout the community. When public safety needs a network, it's very likely to just overwhelm a single site. When you land a plane in the Potomac, that's not going to do much for us in New England. That's going to light up that cell site and all the cell sites around it. And the capacity is required to move that amount of traffic at that site. And that site could be about anywhere in the nation. And I think the network engineers and architects could attest to why you need that much from an engineering perspective. As a practical perspective, you need that much because when we need it, we need it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much.
Mr. Hanley, did you have something you wanted to add? Right. Well, I think that's part of our discussion here is how often do you need that 10 mega? You need it when you need it, but how often is it just going to sit there fallow? And are there other uses during that period? I guess I'm chairman, Dr. Martinez.
And the problem is that if you try to use that capacity for commercial purposes, you devalue its commercial value.
Right.
Because it's subject to preemption. When you need it in an event, a horrific event, then you will have commercial users trying to communicate on a network that's overwhelmed with public safety.
It doesn't necessarily.
So that was the lesson learned from the D block.
Well, that and the way it was structured and the unknowns.
Certainly.
You buy it and then we'll tell you what you have to do.
Certainly
but
as well.
I'm going to get myself in trouble with my colleagues here. Again, Mr. Bilbray, I think
Thank
you're
you,
up next.
Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you clarifying that one of the big problems with the D block is nobody knew what they were buying. You know, especially when you have other commodities on the market, and that lack of definitive explanation of what you were buying for your constituency, wasn't there. Appreciate Mr. Steinberg being here, because I just remember 20 years ago we were putting in a unified system for a county of 3 million people trying to with federal and state agencies, and they're down in San Diego. So I appreciate you bringing that up. But I think that we've got some real challenges, and I think a lot of it is not just technology. A lot of it's mindset. I remember being mayor of a small city of 30,000. We had a dispatcher for the police department, one for the fire department, one for the public works, and one for the lifeguards. But each one of them had to have that kind of their own little pie. Chief, your comment about the need to have the private sector at the table, I think, is quite appropriate, though. Understanding that those of us in government who use the system won't even know what's possible if we do not have those guys at the table, right?
That's correct, Congressman. That's our view.
Now, my question is, we do have a vehicle, and maybe I'm dating myself, by the disaster preparedness councils in every region is sort of the hybrid between a local, regional, and Fed, because it's actually a federal mandated agency that really works with these problems. In fact, I think that was really the key in San Diego we used to put it together. Maybe that is a component of a hybrid between the federal, local, and regional that needs to be considered, of rather reinventing the wheel. Take a look at what we've restructured, used again, and move forward. Comment about that, Chief.
Sir, I'm really not very familiar with who comprises that. I guess I would say it's important at the national level and at the local level, whatever that is that you have people on there that understand public safety and they understand networks. And I think the same mix we talked about has to be present at the local level as well, because network operation is, after all, what we're after.
Well, that's really a challenge, because those two disciplines don't tend to meet very often. Question, Mr. Hanna, we've allocated the 4.9 megahertz. What should public safety be using that spectrum as part of this solution?
Oh, absolutely. As Chief Johnson said, at this time, 4.9 is not really optimum spectrum for any type of broad-based application. It certainly has great potential for offloading traffic in hotspot type zones. It has backhaul provisions. In some areas it is used widely. In many areas it is not used much at all. And I think there are at least a couple of studies that have shown that 4.9, if paired with this network, certainly can enhance the spectrum that we already have. So I think if we just take a look at how we re-engineer that and build that into the network, I think we have a great application for that.
Okay, let me sort of throw something out too. Mr. Haley, you're probably the youngest one on the panel, wouldn't you guess? What we got? How old are you? 44. Okay, is he the youngest, guys? Okay. I just think it's appropriate we bring up these items that we don't like to talk about in proper company. But, Chief, can we admit that there may be a whole generational gap that we're ignoring here, and that is with data? I think you and I know we grew up not texting our friends, not being comfortable in the text and the data file. But I see that like the cruisers that we put computers in, we don't use swipe. We never implemented the swipe card technology, though it was there. Back when we were implementing these systems in the late 70s, early 80s. Don't you think that there may be a heck of a lot more opportunity for data to be used in public safety than what we accept now, just because we've always been used to that grabbing that mic on our sleeve and talking into it, and especially with the next generation who's coming in with a whole new set of tools. These are video game kids that are flying Predators now, and I think just as much as the old Army didn't accept the Predator, now we embrace it. I think there's a real challenge for all of us to sort of look over the horizon and be able to see what the next generation may take of this.
Congressman, your observations are quite insightful. The young firefighters we're hiring today are astonished at the lack of technological capability that we have. And the reality is that because we don't have a mission-critical grade data network today, it really is impeding efficiencies, and I'll be specific. That if you don't have the ability to receive and transmit GPS or automatic vehicle location data in the field, then you can't efficiently deploy your resources, which means that you deploy them statically and you have holes that pop up and you have no way to sense that and adjust to it. Secondly, just even things like controlling traffic signals as opposed to using light to get close to it and turn the signal. The system ought to be able to sense we're coming. It ought to know where we're going, and it ought to clear the route and heal the route as we pass through it. I think, the networks that we deal with, the commercial partners, they're quick to tell you that in the last 5 years, they've grown between 5,000 and 8,000% in terms of throughput of data on their networks. The same thing is going to happen in public safety because the industry has not yet fathomed what public safety needs and designed aggressively to it because we don't have a network to put it on. And I think you're correct in assuming that we're going to see some amazing evolutions in terms of the technology brought to public safety.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure that as we move forward with a national upgrade that we do not continue to try to apply an alpha code in the world of the GPS. And for those of you who don't know alpha code, you can go back and study Lord Nelson and everything else. Thank you.
I didn't know you knew him. Okay, I just want to say, Mr. Johnson, I think you're right on target, and this is what we're trying to capture, is that innovation and not have an isolated network that fails to capture that. So we're just trying to figure out how to get there. Because my iPhone, I can plug in a coordinate, and up comes the GPS, and it walks with me through town. There's ability there. I'm going to go to Mr. Gingrey, and that, I think, is our last on the panel. We will, I'll just tell you in advance, not on Mr. Gingrey's time, we've got a whole bunch of questions. You're a remarkable panel. Thank you for your testimony. And we're going to submit those because they do require longer answers than we have time for today. But I just want to, and I'll do so formally later, but thank you. Mr. Gingrey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I agree. We do have an excellent panel. Unfortunately, I've been going back and forth between this committee and another subcommittee here and a markup. That happens a lot up here, and I apologize for that, but you've done a great job, and we appreciate you being here. Mr. Hanna, I'm going to turn to you first. How important is it that public safety partners with commercial providers if we're going to accomplish these goals that we all agree we need to accomplish?
I appreciate that question. When I first started working on this issue about 6 years ago, I came to public safety talking about broadband on the basis of that relationship between commercial and public safety. I think it is only through that relationship, particularly where you have the economies of scale in the broader ecosystem, that we really take full advantage of what this has to offer. So I think that element is really paramount to success of this network.
Thank you. And let me go to Mr. Steinberg, Dr. Martinez, and Mr. Hanley, and all three of you can respond. How soon will voice over internet protocol over LTE be available? Are we talking 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? How soon could public safety migrate from narrowband and utilize broadband for the entire 24 megahertz the DTV legislation cleared for public safety?
I'll start, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Thank you for a very insightful question. That's one that goes around a lot. It's difficult to predict exactly when, but let me talk to some of the things that have to occur. There's moving voice to broadband, commercial grade voice, which I think you'll see carriers start to do. I've seen an announcement even from one carrier recently that they're heading in that direction in 2012. The difficulties of transcending that to public safety grade mission critical voice, there are a few things we have to overcome to make that occur. Most of them are non-technical. One is we need an interoperable standard. There is no standards body in place today that specifies push-to-talk mission critical voice type communications. So we want that in place, and we want to make sure that we create interoperability. Two is we have to make sure that the network is built out to the coverage requirements that are necessary to support mission critical grade voice. Three, there are a few things in 3GPP standards, nothing major, that have to occur to support that to actually function properly. And then four is we have to actually make sure that once we get there, we truly do achieve interoperability, but not just for voice. We need to think about, as I think the previous question was instructive, about push to X, push to media, so that we're thinking about not just the past, but we're thinking about the future as well. So how long will that take is difficult to answer. I heard answers earlier in the 5 to 10 year range, perhaps while you were out of the room. That's probably not unrealistic considering the maturation that will be required to achieve mission critical grade push to talk.
Let's have Dr. Martinez and Mr. Hanley quickly.
Yes. Congressman, we at Harris have been delivering mission critical voice over IP for over a decade. We understand how to do that. We understand, to Mr. Steinberg's point, that there's yet work to be done in developing of standards. We believe the technology is here today to do that. We believe it will take time to further develop the devices into the right form factors for our first responders and other public safety organizations. We believe that's going to take about 2 to 3 years. We believe there is a point where you have to mature the technology. Chief Johnson made reference to earlier. We must do this in a responsible manner. I would say from an operational perspective, we're probably 3 to 5 years away from that being an effective tool in the field.
Hanley, would you tend to agree with that?
I do agree with that. I think that we need a resilient network that will support mission critical applications, and we need voice quality that is acceptable, and that's the time frame that's appropriate.
I'll continue with Dr. Martinez and Mr. Steinberg in my final question. Some have criticized the public safety equipment community for using a narrow definition of interoperability. How do you define interoperability, and would your definition permit seamless use of competitors' public safety radios with your company's network elements?
Mr. Congressman, as I've testified earlier, I believe that we've addressed interoperability from a technical and operational perspective, and yes, indeed, we believe that the definition of interoperability really is the notion that you can procure interchangeable equipment. With your own experience in the use of cell phones and Wi-Fi devices, you already understand this. You purchase it with confidence that it's going to work. No matter which cell phone manufacturer I purchase from or which operator I operate on, we have the ability to communicate. We can text, we can send images, and so on and so forth. Those are fully interoperable systems, but they're built on a base of interchangeable devices and technologies. We believe that is the model going forward, and how we're going to achieve interoperability is to enforce the procurement process to implement that model.
And if I could just
yes,
amplify a bit, I believe Dr. Martinez spoke correctly that I believe today we have the interoperable standards in the P25 APCO standards that allow this to occur. Interoperation does occur on networks today between competitive handsets and networks. I would just offer as well that Motorola Solutions offers at no charge to our competitors or other suppliers of equipment an interoperability test facility that they may bring their devices into and validate that they conform on our network.
Thank you all. Mr. Chairman, I
thank the gentleman from Georgia and recognize the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Steinberg, given that the absence of a nationwide network both since September 11th as well as what we experienced with Hurricane Katrina, time consideration clearly is going to have to be a consideration in all of this. One of the things I want to ask from a technical standpoint, what would promote a quicker deployment of a nationwide network? Reallocating an additional 10 megahertz to public safety for a new build-out, or supplementing public safety's existing spectrum by working with commercial providers to create that existing network?
So that's an excellent question, and thank you for the opportunity to address it. I think there are several factors that have to go into achieving what you stated as an excellent goal. First, I do believe that one of the problems we spoke of earlier that's contributed to interoperability issues is the hodgepodge or the fragmented spectrum that public safety has accumulated over the years. So that is one of the reasons why we do face an opportunity with the 700 megahertz spectrum band and the opportunity to reallocate the D block, if we can work out all of the other logistics to go with that, to create a nice wide swath of spectrum that everybody can operate upon in a consistent fashion. To your question about what actually gets us there quicker, I think it's a combination of really both factors that have to be brought to bear to actually move us along in that direction.
All right, Mr. Hanna, from what I've been hearing, and whether it's testimony here, just talking with various groups, there are a number of ways to achieve interoperability, and I think some of it's been touched on today. But if you could talk to me about the benefits of creating a nationwide interoperable system in connection with commercial spectrum in the 700 megahertz band, as proposed by the President's National Broadband Plan.
Well, the concept is, if you're working on a common platform, which is the LTE platform, if you have the network sharing agreements, then you have the ability to roll over from one network to the other. So you're simply taking advantage of each other's spectrum in that regard. And what we've talked about earlier is, on a day-to-day basis, public safety does not need the entire block of spectrum. So on those days that you have the bad days that were mentioned earlier, then you can move into that spectrum, the commercial spectrum, and vice versa in some circles, as some people propose. So I think in that regard, you're making maximum use. It's good stewardship of the spectrum that we have.
Do you have an idea of both low end and high end, when there's low utilization, high utilization, how much spectrum would be covered on each of those extremes?
I don't think I could be in a position to tell you, how many megahertz we're going to be using any given day. That's a little bit outside my expertise. So.
Okay. Don't know if anybody else.
I'd just say it's a function also of how densely the cell sites are architected as well, how much capacity is deployed in a given location. So without seeing an architectural design, it's hard to comment on that.
Yeah, and I know that's
one thing that you could use all. I think you probably can use all the capacity in a serious emergency concentrated in time and place. You're going to have a lot of times when you're using much less than that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that the chairman talked about at the outset of the hearing, is the importance of putting a real structure in place so that you're not just throwing money and maybe underutilizing spectrum, not using it to the best of our ability when it's such a scarce resource, so that we can get the best bang for our buck, but also push those timelines so that we're not facing the 10th anniversary of whether it's September 11th or Katrina or some other disaster, and you still don't have that interoperability where we can best achieve that goal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. We recognize now the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me also, I didn't get a chance to welcome Dr. Martinez, who is from a company in Florida, Harris Corporation. He's a CTO. I've had the experience of touring Harris, and actually when I was an Air Force officer, when it was Radiation Incorporated, I used to come in there and fly and accept satellite ground stations for the Strategic Air Command. So I want to welcome Dr. Martinez. And one thought I was thinking about is assuming, in your mind, what government oversight should there be to make the interoperable system work? Maybe you have give us some ideas on that, what oversight should be done.
We of course recognize that this network will serve federal, state, local, and tribal organizations. Clearly, they all have to participate in a significant way in the governance structure, however it evolves. It is important that we don't get to a point that those organizations find themselves looking at the structure from the outside in. They have to be part of it, a fundamental part of it. The National Broadband Plan articulated 3 organizations in particular that were important. The Federal Communications Commission and what it is doing, the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Homeland Security. We believe those 3 organizations must continue to play a significant role and collaboration in defining the structure however it emerges. And those organizations continue to provide oversight from regulatory perspective, from policy perspective. But ultimately, we need to ensure that those organizations, the stakeholders, are able to perform the day-to-day governance functions.
What would be your worst fear, the worst thing that you'd be concerned about?
That is a great question. My worst fear is this issue of economic viability, and I touched upon it very briefly. We must ensure that this network remains economically viable, and that means two things: that it is cost effective and affordable, and that we never put it into a position where we are unable to sustain it. And so I would say that my biggest concern today would be that we wouldn't make the full commitment to ensure that it remains adequately funded, and that we make the commitment to ensure that we're funding it correctly. And I've made the point repeatedly that we have to procure it in a responsible way that allows for innovation and competition, and multi-sourcing, we believe, is the key vehicle.
Anyone else on the panel who'd like to comment, perhaps what their worst fears are, or what the role of oversight should be on the interoperable system? Anyone else? Yes, sir. Mr. Hanna.
On the governance model, I've had a chance to look at great detail at the proposal I mentioned earlier that's been presented to the Senate. I would say, while I'm not enamored with all the provisions of the bill, I am highly impressed with the governance model that they've laid out in that document so far. I'm not sure the rest of my panel shares my concerns. I have deep concerns about a governance model run strictly by the government, because I think our record in that area is rather replete with not being the most successful models. And I think my public safety counterparts would agree that a model run purely by public safety, not including people from industry and those people who are paying for it, also has its issues. So I would say that the model that I've seen so far in Senator Rockefeller's bill, or the draft that's been presented, I find I like it very much.
Mr. Hanna, let me just follow up with a question for you. We have provided the first responders with approximately $13 billion in federal funding over the last decade, as well as approximately 100 megahertz of spectrum for their exclusive use. Where have those resources gone? What worked, what didn't, and why?
Well, that question's been, we've partially addressed that. I mean, one of the unfortunate things is it's gone many places, and that's part of our problem. It's been put out in piecemeal, fragmented basis. I would say we've had a lot of jurisdictions who received a lot of that money. They've put it in good use in their local jurisdiction. There has been no requirement, though, that they have interoperability with others. And I would also suggest that, the Congress has enabled this process by, many times we knee-jerk to a situation. After 9/11, we put a great deal of money on the table, which was admirable to respond to a need. But I don't know that it was put out, with the planning that was needed to ensure a unified approach. So I think the very fragmented nature of public safety communications, we've soaked that in. It's been used locally, but we haven't had the coordination that we'd like to see out of this bill.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to ask that same question to Mr. Chief Johnson, if I could. Yeah, Mr. Chief.
Thank you, Congressman. I think I think it is mostly been spent looking backwards, but I think there's been three causal areas. One, interoperability, which everyone talks about, and we use the name to do other things. I think there's been plenty of this money spent on core operability. And buying equipment for core operability that is interoperable capable, and therefore met the terms of the grant requirements, for example. And I think second, the federal government's had a little piece of responsibility here in that, as we ask all the public safety responders in the nation to narrow band their radios, for many of them, if not most of them, that meant a wholesale replacement of their radios. So when you're facing a wholesale requirement to replace your entire radios, mountaintop, handheld, mobile, et cetera, to meet the narrowbanding requirement, then you start looking for money, and that money is either some of it earmarked for interoperability, which you can do on your path to narrowbanding, and some of it operability with interoperable capable. And I think it's worth adding that one of the benefits for the federal government in narrowbanding is they recapture the spectrum that is left behind when you narrow that band. That band, I assume, will at some point in time be repackaged, reformed, and auctioned, and in part offset some of the expenses that have been made in this area.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Stearns. Gentlemen, we really appreciate your testimony, your insights. As I mentioned earlier, we will have some additional questions we'd appreciate your response to. And I think I can speak on behalf of the whole subcommittee how impressive this panel has been and how helpful in our work you've been. And we look forward to continuing the conversation as we work to get it right this time and make sure that you have the interoperable network that you need at a price we can afford, and that we're maximizing the use of the spectrum along the way. So thank you all, and with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.